The Heiress and the Human. Zenara stood at the helm of her luxury star cruiser, the Eterna, gazing out at the glittering expanse of space. Her silver hair shimmered under the soft glow of the control panel lights. She was the Heiress of the Xylarian Empire, one of the wealthiest and most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. Zenara had never known hardship. Life for her was a series of grand parties, luxury travels, and dismissive glances at those she deemed beneath her, including humans. Humans were a curiosity to her, a primitive species only recently introduced to galactic society. Their short lifespans and limited technology made them little more than pests in her eyes. Her ship carried one such human, a maintenance worker named Ethan, hired for basic repairs. She hadn't even bothered to learn his name, referring to him only as human whenever she needed something fixed. "Human, my beverage warmer isn't working," she called lazily, lounging on a plush seat in the observation deck. Ethan appeared from the shadows, his simple jumpsuit and scruffy brown hair a stark contrast to Zenara's flawless appearance. "It's not a priority, ma'am," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I'm running diagnostics on the ship's power systems. There's been some unusual activity in this sector." Zenara rolled her eyes. "Diagnostics? You're here to fix things, not lecture me on technical nonsense." Ethan didn't argue. He simply nodded and returned to the engine room. He was used to being treated like dirt by those who thought themselves superior. Zenara was no different from the many alien elites he'd encountered during his career. Still, he knew his job, and he took pride in doing it well. The ship hummed softly as it glided through uncharted space, heading toward a nebula Zenara wanted to admire up close. But as the Eterna drew nearer, the hum turned into a violent shudder. The lights flickered, and the ship's automated systems blared warnings. "Power core instability detected. Emergency protocols engage." Zenara shot up from her seat, panic flashing across her face. "What's happening? Fix this, now." Ethan sprinted to the control room, his hands flying across the panels. "We've hit a gravitational anomaly," he said, his tone urgent. "The power core is overloading. We need to shut down all non-essential systems and prepare for a crash landing." "A crash landing? Are you insane?" Zenara snapped. "This is a Xylarian vessel. It doesn't crash." "Well, it's about to," Ethan retorted. "You'd better strap in." Before Zenara could argue further, the ship lurched violently. Sparks flew from the control panels, and a deafening roar filled the air as the engines failed. Ethan grabbed Zenara by the arm and pulled her toward the safety harnesses. "Let go of me," she shrieked, struggling against his grip. "Do you want to die?" Ethan shot back, strapping her into a seat. He barely managed to secure himself before the ship plummeted into the atmosphere of a nearby planet. The Eterna crashed with a thunderous impact, skidding across the rocky terrain before coming to a halt. Smoke and fire billowed from the wreckage, and the once pristine ship was now a crumpled heap of metal. Zenara coughed as she unbuckled herself, her head spinning. What just happened?" she gasped. Ethan climbed out of his harness, checking for injuries. "We're alive, that's what happened. For now, anyway." Zenara glared at him. "This is your fault. You were supposed to keep the ship running." Ethan sighed, too exhausted to argue. "You're welcome for saving your life, by the way. But we don't have time for this. We need to secure the area and figure out how to signal for help." "Help?" Zenara scoffed. "Do you have any idea who I am? My family will send a rescue team immediately." Ethan glanced around at the barren, alien landscape. The sky was a murky shade of green, and strange, jagged plants jutted out of the ground. The air was thick with the sound of distant growls, sending a shiver down his spine. "I wouldn't count on it," he said grimly. "This planet isn't on any known star maps. We're on our own." Zenara's confidence wavered as she took in their surroundings. "You're exaggerating. My people will find us." Ethan shook his head. The ship's distress beacon was destroyed in the crash. Without it, No one even knows we're here." For the first time in her life, Zenera felt a pang of fear. She had always believed herself untouchable, invincible. But now, stranded on an unknown planet with only a human to rely on, she realized just how vulnerable she was. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice quieter than before. Ethan met her gaze, his expression serious. "First, we find shelter. Then, we figure out how to survive." Zenera hesitated, her pride battling with the reality of the situation. She didn't like taking orders from anyone, let alone a human. But as the distant growls grew louder, she swallowed her pride and nodded. "Fine. Lead the way," she said. Ethan smirked faintly. "Gladly." As they ventured into the unknown, Zenera couldn't shake the nagging thought that her fate was now tied to the one being she had always considered beneath her. Little did she know, this human would prove to be far more than she ever imagined. Crash and conflict. The planet was alive with an eerie stillness. Jagged cliffs loomed in the distance, their blackened peaks piercing a greenish, overcast sky. The ground beneath Zenera's feet was dry and cracked, dotted with strange, glowing fungi that pulsed faintly like beating hearts. It was nothing like the lush, manicured gardens of her homeworld. This was chaos. Untamed. Terrifying. Zenera stumbled out of the wreckage of her once grand star cruiser, brushing ash and debris off her expensive outfit. Her pristine white gown, woven from the finest silks of the Tylerian Empire, was now torn and smeared with soot. She scowled in disgust, kicking at a piece of twisted metal. "Unbelievable," she muttered. "This planet smells like rotting algae." From behind her, Ethan emerged, carrying a small survival pack salvaged from the ship. His face was streaked with dirt, but his sharp eyes scanned the horizon with laser focus. "You're welcome to leave any time," he said dryly, hoisting the pack over his shoulder. Zenera turned on him, her silver hair whipping around like a blade. "This is your fault, human. If you had done your job, my ship wouldn't be a pile of scrap." Ethan exhaled slowly, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Right, because I control gravitational anomalies," he replied. "Look, you can blame me all you want later. Right now, we need to focus on surviving." Zenera's eyes narrowed. "Surviving? I don't need survival tips from a janitor." "Maintenance technician," Ethan corrected, kneeling to examine a piece of broken equipment. "And unless you've got secret wilderness training I don't know about, I'm your best chance of getting out of here alive." Zenera opened her mouth to retort, but froze at the sound of a low guttural growl. It was faint, almost like the rumble of distant thunder, but it was unmistakably alive. She turned toward the sound, her eyes wide. "What was that?" she whispered. Ethan didn't answer. He straightened, his hand instinctively reaching for the small energy blade clipped to his belt. His gaze swept the landscape, every muscle in his body tense. "Move," he said quietly. Zenera frowned. "Excuse me." "Move," he repeated, grabbing her arm and pulling her toward the jagged rocks. "Now." For once, Zenera didn't argue. She stumbled alongside him, her heart pounding in her chest. As they reached the shelter of the rocks, Ethan crouched low, motioning for her to do the same. "What are we hiding from?" she hissed, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan pointed toward the horizon. At first, Zenera saw nothing but the shifting shadows of the cliffs. Then, something massive moved. It was a creature unlike anything she'd ever seen, towering and reptilian, with 6 legs and a head that split open into 4 jaws. Its skin shimmered like oil, reflecting the faint glow of the fungi. "That," Ethan said grimly. "Welcome to your new neighbors." Zenera's throat went dry. What is that thing?" "No idea," Ethan replied, "but it looks hungry." The creature sniffed the air, its jaws clicking together as it lumbered closer. Zenera pressed herself against the rocks, her breathing shallow. For the first time in her life, she felt truly insignificant. "What do we do?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Ethan didn't answer right away. He reached into the survival pack, pulling out a small flare. "We distract it and run." "Run? Are you insane?" Zenara hissed. "That thing will catch us in seconds." "Not if we're smart," Ethan said. He lit the flare, the bright red light cutting through the gloom. The creature's head snapped toward it, its jaws spreading wide, as it let out a deafening screech. "Go," Ethan shouted, throwing the flare as far as he could. Zenara hesitated, frozen by fear. Ethan grabbed her hand, pulling her to her feet and dragging her away from the rocks. The creature lunged toward the flare, its massive claws tearing into the ground. As they ran, Zenara's lungs burned and her legs ached. She wasn't used to this. Running, sweating, feeling mortal. She hated it, but the sound of the creature's screeches drove her forward, every instinct screaming at her to survive. They didn't stop until they reached a narrow canyon, its walls rising high above them. Ethan pulled Zenara into the shadows, both of them gasping for air. The creature's roars echoed faintly in the distance, growing fainter with each passing second. Zenara collapsed against the canyon wall, her body trembling. This is a nightmare." Ethan sat beside her, his chest heaving. "Welcome to reality," he said, his tone edged with bitterness. "Not so shiny and perfect, is it?" Zenara didn't respond. For the first time, she had no snide remark, no cutting insult. She was too shaken, too scared. All she could do was stare at the human beside her, the one she had dismissed as unworthy. Maybe she was wrong about him, but she would never admit that. Not yet. Into the wild. Zenara awoke to the sound of alien birds cawing in the greenish sky above. The air was thick and humid, clinging to her like an unwelcome cloak. She blinked at her surroundings, disoriented. Gone were the glittering halls of her star cruiser. In their place was a crude shelter made from ship debris and twisted vines, barely shielding her from the elements. Ethan was already awake, crouched by a small fire he had managed to spark with a survival kit. His hands moved deftly, sharpening a metal rod into a makeshift spear. The human looked calm, focused, a stark contrast to the turmoil bubbling inside her. "You could have at least built something bigger," Zenara muttered, sitting up and wincing as pain shot through her shoulder. She had bruises everywhere. Ethan glanced at her but said nothing, returning to his task. The silence stretched uncomfortably, making Zenara fidget. She hated being ignored, especially by a human. "Did you hear me?" she pressed. "I heard you," Ethan replied, still not looking up. "I just didn't think complaining would help." Zenara bristled. "Complaining? I'm pointing out your inefficiency." Ethan finally raised his gaze, his brown eyes meeting hers. "I spent all night keeping watch so we wouldn't get eaten by whatever's out there," he said evenly. "Sorry if the decor isn't up to Silurian standards." Zenara opened her mouth to retort but closed it again. For once, she didn't have a clever comeback. She had noticed the deep circles under his eyes and the way his shoulders sagged slightly, as if the weight of their survival rested entirely on him. "Fine," she muttered, looking away. "What's the plan?" Ethan stood, testing the balance of his makeshift spear. "We're heading for the beacon." "The beacon?" Zenara frowned. "You said it was damaged." "It was," Ethan said. "But the core might still have enough power to send a short-range signal. It's our best shot at getting off this rock." Zenara groaned. "How far is it?" "Couple of miles, maybe more. The terrain's rough, so it won't be easy." Zenara stared at him, incredulous. "You expect me to trek across this death trap of a planet? On foot? Unless you've got a teleportation device hidden in that dress." "Yeah," Ethan said with a shrug. "Look, I don't like this any more than you do, but sitting here won't help. The longer we stay, the more likely something finds us, and not in a good way." As if on cue, a distant howl echoed through the air, low and guttural. Zenara's skin prickled, and she instinctively moved closer to Ethan. He didn't seem to notice, or if he did, he didn't comment. "Fine," she said reluctantly. "Let's go." The journey was worse than Zenara had imagined. The terrain was uneven, littered with sharp rocks and strange, glowing plants that oozed a sticky green substance. Ethan moved with practiced efficiency, scanning their surroundings and occasionally pausing to check the direction. Zenara, meanwhile, stumbled over every other rock, muttering curses under her breath. "This is barbaric," she complained, wiping sweat from her brow. "Do humans enjoy this kind of suffering?" Ethan smirked faintly. "It's called survival. You might want to get used to it." Zenara shot him a glare but said nothing. She was too tired to argue. Her legs ached, her feet were blistered, and her pride was hanging by a thread. As they approached a narrow river, Ethan held up a hand, signaling her to stop. He crouched low, studying the water with narrowed eyes. "What is it now?" Zenara asked, exasperated. "Something's wrong," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The water's too still." Zenara frowned. "And that's bad." "Still water means there's a predator nearby," Ethan explained. "Something big enough to scare everything else away." Zenara's stomach twisted. "You're making that up." "Do you want to test the theory?" Ethan asked, raising an eyebrow. Before she could respond, the surface of the water rippled. Slowly, a massive serpentine creature emerged, its slick, black scales glinting in the faint sunlight. Its eyes were a sickly yellow, and its jaw was lined with rows of razor-sharp teeth. The creature hissed, its forked tongue flicking toward them. Zenara froze, her breath catching in her throat. What do we do?" "Stay calm," Ethan whispered, gripping his spear tightly. "Don't move." The creature slithered closer, its gaze fixed on them. Zenara's heart pounded so loudly she was sure it could hear. She tried to hold still, but her legs trembled with fear. "Ethan," she hissed through clenched teeth. "Do something." Ethan didn't respond. He was focused entirely on the creature, waiting for the right moment. When it lunged, he sprang into action, dragging the spear into its side. The creature screeched in pain, thrashing wildly as Ethan shouted for Zenara to run. For the first time in her life, Zenara didn't argue. She ran, her feet pounding against the ground as the sounds of the battle faded behind her. She didn't stop until she reached a cluster of rocks, collapsing behind them and gasping for air. Minutes later, Ethan appeared, bloodied but alive. He dropped down beside her, panting heavily. "You killed it?" Zenara asked, staring at him in disbelief. Ethan shook his head. "Just scared it off. We need to keep moving before it comes back." Zenara swallowed hard, her gaze lingering on the human who had just risked his life for her. For the first time, she saw him not as a nuisance but as something more, a fighter, a protector. She didn't say it out loud, but in that moment, Zenara realized she owed her life to the one being she had always looked down on, and it terrified her. Sacrifice and trust. The night on the alien planet was unlike anything Zenara had ever experienced. The sky was a canvas of swirling green and violet streaks, glowing faintly like dying embers. But the beauty of it was lost on her. Every sound, the snap of a branch, the rustle of leaves, sent a jolt of fear through her chest. The shadows seemed alive, crawling closer with each passing second. Ethan was crouched nearby, tending to a small, smokeless fire. His makeshift spear leaned against a rock, ready to be grabbed at a moment's notice. Zenara sat a few feet away, wrapped in a thermal blanket salvaged from the wreckage. Her silver hair, usually immaculate, was now matted with dirt and sweat. For the first time in her life, she felt small, fragile. "Why aren't you sleeping?" Ethan asked without looking up. His voice was calm, but there was a sharp edge to it. "Do you think I can sleep in this nightmare?" Zenara snapped, her tone harsher than she intended. Ethan didn't respond right away. He was too busy inspecting a wound on his forearm, where the alien serpent from earlier had grazed him with its jagged scales. The cut wasn't deep, but it looked painful. Zenara noticed the way he winced as he cleaned it with a piece of cloth. "Is that bad?" she asked hesitantly, gesturing to the wound. "I've had worse," Ethan said simply. He wrapped the cloth tightly around his arm, and finally looked up at her. "You should try to rest. We've got a long day ahead." Zenara scoffed. "Rest? While you sit there pretending everything is fine. We're stranded on a planet full of monsters, and you're acting like this is just another day at work." Ethan leaned back against a rock, crossing his arms. "If I freak out, it won't help either of us. So yeah, I act like it's just another day. Keeps me focused." Zenara frowned. She hated how calm he was. It made her feel even more out of control. But deep down, she couldn't deny that his composure was the only thing keeping her grounded. "Why are you even helping me?" she blurted out, her voice softer now. "You could have left me back at the crash site. You don't owe me anything." Ethan looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Because I don't leave people behind, even ones who think I'm a janitor." Before Zenara could respond, a loud guttural roar tore through the night. Both of them froze, their eyes darting toward the darkness beyond the firelight. The sound was closer than any of the creatures they had heard before. Too close. "Put the fire out," Ethan whispered urgently, already grabbing his spear. Zenara hesitated, her hands trembling. "What is it?" "Something big," Ethan said, his voice tight. "And it knows we're here." The roar came again, followed by the heavy thud of footsteps. The ground seemed to vibrate with each step, the creature moving with deliberate purpose. Zenara scrambled to her feet, clutching the blanket around her like a shield. "What do we do?" she whispered. Ethan's eyes darted around, calculating. The firelight glinted off his determined expression. "You're going to run." "What?" Zenara's voice rose in panic. "I can't." "You can. And you will," Ethan interrupted. He pointed toward a cluster of jagged rocks in the distance. "Head for those rocks. They'll give you cover." "What about you?" she asked, her voice trembling. Ethan smirked faintly. "I'll distract it. Buy you some time." Zenara shook her head, her chest tightening. "That's suicide." "You can't." "Zenara," Ethan said sharply, cutting her off. "If we both run, it'll catch us. If I keep it busy, you've got a chance. Now go." Tears stung her eyes, but she nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. For the first time in her life, she felt powerless, and it was unbearable. Don't die," she whispered. Ethan didn't answer. He turned toward the darkness, gripping his spear tightly as the creature came into view. It was massive, easily the size of a star cruiser pod, with thick, armored scales and glowing red eyes. Its maw opened, revealing rows of jagged teeth, and it let out a deafening roar that shook the ground. "Hey, ugly," Ethan shouted, waving his spear to get its attention. "You want dinner? Come and get it." The creature lunged, and Ethan darted to the side, narrowly avoiding its snapping jaws. Zenara didn't wait to see what happened next. She ran, her legs burning as she sprinted toward the rocks. Every step felt like an eternity, the roars and crashing sounds behind her spurring her forward. When she reached the rocks, she collapsed, gasping for air. Her hands trembled as she clutched at the jagged edges, her heart pounding in her chest. She turned back, searching the darkness for any sign of Ethan. Minutes passed. The sounds of the battle faded, replaced by an eerie silence. Zenara's stomach twisted. Had he? Just as despair began to creep in, a figure emerged from the shadows, limping toward her. It was Ethan, bloodied and battered but alive. His spear was broken and his clothes were torn, but he was grinning. "Miss me?" he said, collapsing beside her. Zenara stared at him, her heart swelling with a mix of relief and gratitude she couldn't put into words. For the first time, she realized how much she owed this human, and how much she had underestimated him. The Heiress humbled, The Xylarian sky was streaked with violent shades of crimson and amber as dawn broke, casting long shadows across the alien terrain. Zinera sat cross-legged on a patch of brittle ground, staring at her reflection in a small, cracked shard of metal. Her once pristine appearance was gone. Her silver hair hung in matted clumps, her gown was torn and dirty, and her face bore faint scratches from their escape the night before. She barely recognized herself. Ethan was a few meters away, crouched near a small pile of strange, spiky plants. His knife moved with precision, peeling away their outer layers to reveal a sticky, fleshy interior. He worked in silence, the methodical rhythm of his movements calming in its own way. Zinera broke the silence. "What is that?" "Breakfast," Ethan replied without looking up. She wrinkled her nose. "That looks poisonous." "Everything looks poisonous if you're not used to it," he said with a faint smirk. "But this is edible, high in nutrients. We need the energy." Zinera frowned. "We? You mean you? I'd rather starve than eat, whatever that is." Ethan sighed and sat back, wiping his hands on his pants. "Suit yourself, princess, but when you're too weak to walk, don't expect me to carry you." Her pride flared at the jab, but she bit her tongue. She was exhausted, sore, and hungry, though she'd never admit the last part. The smell of the plant's inner flesh, earthy and slightly sweet, made her stomach growl in betrayal. She glanced at Ethan, who seemed perfectly content eating the alien plant. If he could survive on it, maybe she could too. She reached out hesitantly. "Fine. Give me some." Ethan raised an eyebrow, but handed her a small piece. "Chew slowly. It's tougher than it looks." Zinera took a tentative bite, her face contorting at the bitter taste. She forced herself to swallow, glaring at Ethan as if it were his fault. "This is terrible." "It's survival," he said simply, "not fine dining." As they packed up their makeshift camp, Zinera couldn't shake the growing sense of unease gnawing at her. The planet was hostile in ways she hadn't expected, and Ethan seemed to know exactly what to do at every turn. It was infuriating and humbling. "How do you know so much about surviving in places like this?" she asked as they started walking. "Don't tell me humans actually live like this." Ethan chuckled, though there was no humor in it. "Not exactly. But humans adapt. We have to. I grew up on a mining colony. Harsh environment, limited resources, constant danger. You learn pretty quickly how to make do." Zinera blinked, surprised. "A mining colony? Your family owned one." He shook his head. "We worked in one. Long hours, little pay, and plenty of risks. You either figured out how to survive, or you didn't." She was silent for a moment, her mind struggling to process the idea. "That sounds primitive." "Primitive." Ethan stopped walking and turned to face her. "You call it primitive. I call it life. Not all of us are born into luxury, Zinera. Most people have to fight for everything they have. Maybe it's time you learned that." His words stung, but Zinera couldn't argue. She had spent her life looking down on species like humans, dismissing them as weak and unsophisticated. Yet here she was, relying on one to stay alive. Hours later, they reached the remains of the ship's emergency beacon. The structure was half buried in a rocky crevice, its metal frame bent and scorched from the crash. Ethan immediately got to work, pulling tools from his pack and inspecting the damaged components. "Can you fix it?" Zinera asked, watching him with a mixture of hope and skepticism. Ethan frowned, running a hand through his dirt-streaked hair. "Maybe. The core's intact, but the transmitter's fried. I can rig something, but it'll take time." "How much time?" she pressed. "A few hours, maybe more." Zinera groaned, leaning against a nearby rock. "This is hopeless." "Not if you stop whining and help," Ethan said without looking up. He tossed her a small tool. "Start cleaning the connectors. They're covered in debris." Zinera stared at the tool as if it were an alien artifact. "You want me to help? I don't even know how. Then you'd better learn fast, Ethan replied. Unless you'd rather sit there and wait for another one of those six-legged monsters to show up. Her face paled at the reminder. Reluctantly, she crouched beside him and began scraping at the connectors, her hands clumsy but determined. It was the first time in her life she had ever done manual labor, and it was oddly grounding. As they worked, the faint hum of a ship engine echoed in the distance. Zenara's heart leaped. Is that rescue? Ethan's expression darkened. He grabbed her arm, pulling her behind a large rock. Stay down. What? Why? She whispered, panicking. That's not a rescue ship, Ethan said grimly. That's a bounty hunter's freighter. Her blood ran cold. Bounty hunters? For who? Ethan's gaze met hers, and the answer hit her like a punch to the gut. You, he said quietly. Someone's put a price on your head. Zenara's knees buckled, and she sank to the ground, her mind reeling. The truth was beginning to unravel her carefully constructed world. Her family, her empire, everything she had relied on was crumbling. Ethan tightened his grip on his spear, his expression hardening. Stay here. I'll handle this. No, Zenara said, her voice shaking but firm. I'll help. Ethan raised an eyebrow, surprised but not arguing. Then stay quiet and follow my lead. As the freighter's shadow loomed over them, Zenara gripped the tool in her hand tightly, her heart pounding. For the first time, she wasn't just fighting to survive. She was fighting for her life. And she wasn't alone. Betrayal and revelation. The freighter descended with an ominous hum, its sleek black hull reflecting the planet's dim, green-tinged sunlight. Zenara and Ethan crouched behind jagged rocks, their bodies pressed against the cool stone. The bounty hunters hadn't landed far. The hiss of hydraulic doors echoed through the canyon, followed by the clatter of boots on the ground. Ethan's hand tightened around the broken spear he still carried, his eyes locked on the approaching figures. Zenara, clutching a makeshift dagger Ethan had crafted from scrap, felt her pulse racing. This wasn't a scenario she had ever imagined for herself. She wasn't just running for survival anymore. She was being hunted. What do they want with me? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Ethan didn't look at her. His gaze was fixed on the bounty hunters, who were scanning the area with devices that beeped in unsettlingly rhythmic tones. They're not here for small talk, that's for sure, he muttered. Stay low, stay quiet, and let me do the talking. Zenara bit back a retort. For once, she knew better than to argue. The bounty hunters moved with a predatory grace, their armor glinting in the faint light. There were 3 of them, 2 towering figures in bulky suits and a smaller one in sleek, black plating. The leader, unmistakable by the way they commanded the others with subtle gestures, carried a weapon that hummed with barely restrained energy. Signal strongest here, the leader said, their voice distorted by a helmet filter. She's close. Sweep the area. Zenara tensed, her knuckles white around the dagger. Ethan leaned closer to her, his voice a low murmur. On my signal, run to the beacon. Don't stop. Don't look back. What about you? She asked, panic rising. I'll keep them busy, he said simply. Before she could protest, Ethan stood, stepping out from their cover with his hands raised. Hey, over here, he shouted, his voice echoing across the canyon. The bounty hunters whirled around, their weapons snapping up. The leader took a step forward, their helmet tilting slightly. And who might you be? Just a guy trying to survive, Ethan said, his tone casual. Figured you might have food, or I don't know, a way off this rock. The leader's visor glinted as they studied him. You're not our target. Ethan shrugged. No, but I know where your target is. Zenara's heart stopped. She stared at Ethan, her mind racing. He wouldn't, he couldn't, but his expression was unreadable, his body language calm and deliberate. Why would you help us? The leader asked, their voice skeptical. Let's just say she hasn't exactly been easy to travel with, Ethan said, his smirk faint. "I'll tell you where she is, but I want something in return." The leader motioned for the others to lower their weapons, intrigued. "Go on. Get me off this planet," Ethan said. "You can keep the bounty. I just want to ride out of here." Zenara felt her stomach drop. She clenched the dagger tighter, torn between fury and disbelief. Was this really happening? Was Ethan, her only ally, betraying her? The leader considered Ethan's offer, then nodded. "Fine. Tell us where she is." Ethan pointed toward a cluster of rocks in the opposite direction of the beacon. "She's hiding over there. But she's fast, so you'll want to move quick." The leader signaled to the other 2 hunters, who immediately took off toward the rocks. The leader stayed behind, their weapons still trained on Ethan. "Smart move. Now let's see if you're telling the truth." As the other hunters disappeared into the distance, Ethan moved. In one fluid motion, he grabbed a handful of dirt and flung it at the leader's visor, blinding them. Before they could react, Ethan lunged, slamming the broken spear into a joint in their armor. Sparks flew as the weapon crackled, and the leader stumbled backward with a grunt of pain. "Run," Ethan shouted, his voice cutting through Zenara's shock. Snapping out of her daze, Zenara bolted toward the beacon, her feet pounding against the rocky ground. Behind her, she heard the crackle of energy weapons and the clash of metal on metal. She wanted to turn back, to see if Ethan was okay, but she forced herself to keep going. When she reached the beacon, Zenara collapsed to her knees, gasping for air. The beacon's core still glowed faintly, its fractured casing pulsing with unstable energy. She had no idea how to operate it, but she knew she had to try. Ethan had risked his life to give her this chance. As she frantically scanned the controls, a voice crackled to life behind her. "Trying to run, little Heiress." Zenara whipped around to see the leader of the bounty hunters, battered but still standing. Their weapon was aimed directly at her. She froze, her mind racing for a way out. "You're worth quite a lot to some very powerful people," the leader said, their tone cold. "Your family's not as fond of you as you think." Her heart sank. What are you talking about?" The leader chuckled darkly. "Did you really think this was just about the money? Your family wants you gone, Heiress, permanently." Zenara's blood turned to ice. She stared at the bounty hunter, her world crumbling around her. Her family, her own blood, had betrayed her. Before she could process the revelation, a familiar voice called out, "Hey, over here." The leader turned just in time to see Ethan charging toward them, a jagged piece of metal in hand. He struck with precision, disarming the bounty hunter and sending their weapon clattering to the ground. "Finish the beacon," Ethan shouted as he grappled with the hunter. Zenara didn't hesitate this time. She turned back to the controls, her fingers trembling as she worked to power up the transmitter. The beacon flared to life, sending a bright beam of light into the sky. Minutes later, the bounty hunter lay unconscious, and Ethan limped over to Zenara, his face streaked with dirt and sweat. "You get it working." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. They betrayed me. My own family." Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice steady. "Then it's time you stop living for them. You've got a second chance now. Don't waste it." As the beacon's signal pulsed through the sky, Zenara felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope, true worth. The faint hum of engines filled the air, growing louder as the human rescue ship descended through the dense, green-tinged clouds. Zenara stood at the edge of the clearing, her eyes fixed on the approaching vessel. For the first time in days, she felt the crushing weight of fear lift slightly, but not completely. Her world was forever changed, and the cracks in her once unshakable confidence now ran deep. Behind her, Ethan leaned against a jagged rock, his body battered and bruised but upright. He was watching the ship too, though with a wary, calculating expression. Zenara noticed how tightly he gripped the broken spear in his hand, as if expecting this moment of salvation to turn sour. "You think it's really them?" she asked, her voice quieter than usual. Ethan's gaze flicked to her, assessing. Probably. But don't assume everyone's here to help. Zenera frowned, crossing her arms. Do you trust anyone? Ethan smirked faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. Not anymore. The ship touched down with a heavy thud, its thrusters kicking up dust and debris. The loading ramp extended with a metallic hiss, and a group of uniformed humans emerged, their faces grim but focused. Zenera felt a flicker of hope at the sight of their Earth insignias, though Ethan remained tense. The leader of the group, a tall woman with close-cropped hair and piercing blue eyes, stepped forward. Distress signal received. We're here to extract survivors. Identify yourselves. Zenera straightened, her voice regaining a sliver of its usual authority. I am Zenera Alforin of the Xylarian Empire. This man is Ethan. We've been stranded here for... Save the speech, Ethan interrupted, stepping in front of her. We just need a lift. The woman's sharp eyes lingered on Ethan, then Zenera, and finally the unconscious bounty hunter still sprawled near the beacon, her lips pressed into a thin line. Bounty hunters. Ethan nodded. Not friendly ones. The leader turned to her crew. Secure the area. Bring the survivors aboard. Be quick. As the crew moved to comply, Zenera hesitated, glancing at Ethan. She had spent so long looking down on humans, dismissing them as inferior. But now, standing beside Ethan, she realized just how wrong she had been. He had saved her life, again and again, without expecting anything in return. And despite the bitterness he carried, he hadn't let it consume him. Ethan, she said softly. Thank you. He glanced at her, raising an eyebrow. For what? For everything, she said, her voice trembling. For saving me, even when I didn't deserve it. Ethan looked away, his expression unreadable. Just doing what needed to be done. Aboard the rescue ship, the tension in Zenera's chest finally began to ease. The crew treated Ethan's wounds and provided her with clean clothing, though she barely noticed. Her mind was consumed with thoughts of what lay ahead. Her family had betrayed her, hired bounty hunters to ensure she never returned. Everything she had once taken for granted, her wealth, her power, her legacy, was gone. What are you going to do now? Ethan asked, leaning against the wall of the medical bay. His tone was casual, but his eyes held genuine curiosity. I don't know, Zenera admitted. The words tasted foreign in her mouth. She wasn't used to uncertainty. I suppose I'll start over. Ethan nodded. Good. Start over with a clearer perspective. She shot him a wry smile. Do humans always give advice, or is it just you? Just me, he said with a grin. As the ship lifted off, Zenera stood at a viewport, watching the alien planet shrink below them. For the first time in her life, she felt small, not in a bad way, but in a humbling, grounding way. She wasn't the center of the universe, and that was okay. Ethan joined her, his arms crossed. You'll be fine, you know. She glanced at him. How do you know? Because you've already survived worse, he said simply, and because now you've got something most people never get. A chance to prove you're more than where you came from. Zenera was quiet for a moment, letting his words sink in. She didn't fully understand humans, but Ethan had shown her what they were capable of: resilience, determination, and an unyielding will to protect others. If she could carry even a fraction of that with her, maybe she'd be okay. Ethan, she said, turning to face him, when we reach a human colony, will you stay? I could use someone like you. He chuckled. Someone like me. A scrappy maintenance tech who's too stubborn to die. Exactly, she said, her lips curving into a rare, genuine smile. Ethan considered her for a moment, then nodded. All right, princess, but don't expect me to call you ma'am. Zenera laughed, a sound she hadn't heard from herself in what felt like years. For the first time, she felt truly alive. And as the ship carried them toward a new future, she realized that her life was no longer about titles or wealth. It was about what she chose to build, and who she chose to build it with.